Hey everyone, tonight we are exploring the life of a legendary figure, Alex the Great. This remarkable man managed to conquer almost half of the known world before reaching the age of 33. As a teenager, he mastered riding untamed horses, casually established cities as if he was playing an ancient version of SimCity, and yet still wrestled every morning with the simple question of what to eat for breakfast. Would it be roasted lamb presented in a golden dish, boiled lentils enjoyed inside a battle tent, or just whatever food didn't escape quickly enough? Before we dive into his royal meal, take a moment to like this video and subscribe only if you truly appreciate the content here. Also, share in the comments your location and the current time where you are watching. I love knowing who is watching this at 2 in the morning, munching cereal straight from the box like a true commanding general. Now lower the lights, maybe switch on a fan for a gentle background noise. Let's slowly begin our journey together tonight. Before Alex became the Great, he was simply a boy told to eat his morning porridge. Long before his empire was built, before he set out to conquer the world and be mourned across 3 continents, young Alex of Macedon started his day like any noble son, with a fiercely healthy and intriguingly tough breakfast. Imagine a cold Macedonian dawn. The sun is still below the horizon, and Arthur is not awake yet. But the kitchen buzzes with the sound of boiling barley, and people pretending it tastes better today. The morning meal for young Alex probably included boiled barley gruel. This was merely a polite expression for hot, slightly salty porridge. Occasionally, it might have been enhanced with a splash of goat's milk or, on special occasions, a dried fig that seemed as if it had endured some hardship. Beside this steaming bowl of mild disappointment, there would have been bread, likely made from emmer or barley flour, coarse in texture and entirely opposed to any softness. This was the kind of bread that stared right back, held grudges, and could double as a blunt instrument during moments of political unrest. Olives would also be present because nothing quite captures childhood breakfast like bitter, oily fruit soaked in brine. If you were fortunate, and by fortunate I mean born into a royal lineage with at least one surviving parent, you might receive a wedge of goat cheese aged to the point of self-defense, capable of clearing your sinuses from across the room. To accompany it all, there was wine. Yes, even for a child. But do not get excited. The wine was heavily diluted, more like purple water. Macedonians believed that drinking pure wine was reserved for barbarians and poets lacking good judgment. It sounds modest, and it was, but not because the Macedonian court lacked resources. Quite the opposite. Alex's father, Philip II, intentionally raised his son in an environment of discipline. No extravagance, no softness, just calories, protein, and the mental training of a man who would one day consume field rations in Persia without hesitation. So there was no golden luxury. Pancakes were absent. There was no luxurious eggs. Benedict just a simple mash, olives and bread, so heavy it could support a crumbling pillar. Breakfast was the first victory of the day. Picture sitting down for your midday meal and facing Arthur, a philosopher and scientist who never tolerated excess. You wanted to peacefully enjoy your barley bread, and perhaps a fig while he launched into a lecture on moderation, between mouthfuls of lentil stew. Young Alex was not merely mastering swordsmanship. His education included ethics, logic, rhetoric, and probably which foods would make him sluggish in his quest to conquer Asia. Arthur, being a student of Plato and a believer in balance in all areas, took it upon himself to ensure Alex's body and mind were nourished equally, though his enthusiasm for meals might have differed. Food occasions were moments for building character. If Alex reached for an extra slice of cheese, Arthur would likely raise a skeptical brow and casually point out how overindulgence dulls the spirit and clouds judgment. Those were truly lively mealtimes. Yet this was not mere stern food criticism. Arthur saw eating as fundamental in shaping leaders. Too little led to weakness, too much to luxury. Between these extremes lay the empire and unwavering resolve. It is probable Alex learned to distinguish between sustenance as energy and food as vanity during those lessons. Simple foods like lentils were believed to nurture the soul, which is remarkable. Considering how they often ended up tasting like disappointment unless heavily seasoned, Many dishes were met with skepticism. Anything too sweet, too spicy, or overly rich was viewed with distrust, as if it could lead one to moral decay or to relaxing in silk by sunset. There is even a certain irony in how food became a source of education. While most children were learning the alphabet by engraving letters onto wax tablets, Alex was probably being questioned on what Arthur believed about the proper wine mixtures, and if figs could provoke impure thoughts. This approach to eating stayed with him, even when Persian cuisine was putting forth its finest offerings. Lamb cooked in pomegranate sauce and rice so aromatic it seemed almost forbidden rarely swayed Alex. He typically stuck to simple staples such as bread, meat, water, and perhaps a few olives when feeling indulgent. So, no, dining with Arthur was not exactly enjoyable, but it was certainly instructive. Alex did not only master how to take over cities, he also learned the discipline of refusing extra helpings. Back in ancient Macedon, that was what true leadership meant. If you have ever packed a lunch filled with care, hope, and just a single piece of hardened bread, you could already be considered a Macedonian field cook. The standard midday meal during those times was not about savoring flavors, but about keeping from collapsing under the scorching sun while yelling battle cries. Alex's everyday lunch, especially before launching campaigns, would have been plain almost to the point of severity. Imagine a tough piece of barley or emma bread, toughened by time and wear. The bread was as hard as ceramic tile. This was the kind of bread you had to earn the right to chew, preferably armed with a dagger and a silent plea. Alongside this crunchy staple of the meal were a few local delicacies. Goat cheese, known for lasting well on the road but smelling as if it wanted to fight you, and onions, which were nearly a food group in Macedon. Onions were believed to boost strength and stamina, though they evidently caused bad breath diplomacy. Depending on the season and whether the supply caravan had escaped wolves, you might also find a small pouch of figs or dried dates. These fruits served as the ancient equivalent of dessert, chewy, sticky, and with a texture somewhere between leather and regret. For protein, there might be salted or dried meat, usually goat or beef, sometimes wild boar if they had recently raided a wealthy enemy. This meat was neither juicy nor tender. It dared you to choke while eating and still come out victorious. As for drinks, if they were fortunate, diluted wine might be available. Otherwise, lukewarm water from a leather flask was the alternative, which had spent most of the day soaking in sweat and dust from the saddle. Truly refreshing. It is notable that Alex consumed the same meals as his soldiers. He did not summon exotic spices or demand grapes peeled by hand. No, he sat on the ground, tore off a piece of the rock-hard bread, and chewed with the determination of a man trying to inspire an empire with nothing but the strength of his jaw. When we consider this, the reality of a Macedonian lunchbox does not bring to mind a charming bento box. Instead, imagine a rough sack filled with enough calories to barely keep you alive, functional and fierce, much like the man himself. Sharing dinner with your father is already a stressful experience during your teenage years. Now picture your father as King Philip II of Macedon, a ruler who balanced diplomacy, warfare, and no fewer than 7 wives as if it were a highly competitive contest. Welcome to mealtime at the royal court, where the food was served warm, but the conversations could easily result in exile. Philip's feasts were probably impressive by Macedonian standards, yet nowhere near the extravagance of Roman indulgence. Expect hearty roasted meats, thick lentil stews, boiled grains, and a jug of wine that had witnessed many events. The king was well known for his fondness for drink. Ancient historians politely described him as a heavy drinker, their way of saying your father got drunk quite often. Young Alex often refrained from wine or consumed it sparingly, not because he disliked it, but because Philip mixed politics with drinking. Alex was already plotting his moves like a small general, and nothing kills your appetite like watching your father negotiate a military alliance amid bites of burnt lamb, while the discussion turns intense. Military advisors debated over borders, poets recited verses between mouthfuls of stew, and philosophers freely insulted one another in ancient Greek. All the while Alex quietly ate his meal. He schemes quietly, devising ways to eventually outmaneuver his father, which he truly accomplished, by the way. From time to time, Philip would return with unusual ingredients or meals from various regions of the Greek world. Spiced fish, sweet pastries made with honey, or peculiar herbs that made your tongue tingle. Alex sampled these dishes, offering courteous praise, but he always gravitated back to the essentials. Bread, meat, wine, reliable, steady, and ideal for building an empire. The emotional atmosphere at these dinners? Let's just say therapy had yet to be invented. Philip was both an example to follow and a frustrating headache in sandals. Their bond mixed affection with fierce conflict. At one point, Alex even stormed out when Philip insulted him while intoxicated. That shows how tense the mood could be. And this was all before someone attempted to assassinate Philip with a spear. So yes, dining with his father played a crucial role in Alex's development. It honed his political instincts, strengthened his determination, and probably fostered a lasting taste for quiet meals with fewer risks of being stabbed. Now imagine Alex on the move, not just on any path, but one stretching across blistering deserts, frost-covered mountain passes, and sometimes over the smoldering ruins left behind by his foes. What is served for lunch amid such a landscape? A hearty portion of desperation paired with strategic sustenance. The field provisions in Alex's army were not crafted for taste. They prioritized survival, agility, and ideally avoiding death on the march. These meals kept his troops moving through harsh conditions, even in the middle of March. Imagine a linen sack packed with barley bread, onions, and dried meat. These items were perfect for travel, durable, and uniquely tough in texture. The bread was dense, hard, and tasteless. If you managed to bite through it without injuring your teeth, you were considered strong enough for duty. These bread loaves served not only as food but also as tools, makeshift shields, and sometimes even as comfort objects. When warmed over a campfire, they became somewhat edible. Otherwise, cold bread was as hard to bite as a stone. Meat, when available, was heavily salted to the point of losing its original flavor. Goat, lamb, or beef was sliced very thin, sun-dried, and salted until it resembled a mineral rather than flesh. This was no ordinary jerky, but something closer to a test of dental endurance. However, it preserved well, and soaking it in water or wine long enough could soften it. Onions and garlic were constant staples, not because they were delightful, but due to their affordability, strong aroma, and their reputed power to increase stamina. Nothing signals readiness for combat like breath strong enough to clear a room. For hydration, diluted wine was consumed. It was not enough to intoxicate, but enough to make water taste less like old leather and despair. Pure water was often unsafe, especially when traversing 700 miles through Persia, where local streams were rightly avoided. There were rare exceptions. Sometimes, after a victory, Alex permitted a feast with roasted animals, herb-topped flatbreads, and wine that did not resemble something boiled. Sandals were uncommon and always followed by yet another grueling march. It was never indulgence for the sake of indulgence. Rather, it was a reward that brought soldiers back to the harsh reality. Field rations may not have been gourmet meals, but they sustained you, kept you alert, and fueled just enough fury to confront the next empire. And Alex ate the exact same food, not out of necessity, but because he believed no one deserved better fare than his army. Imagine this scene. You have been trekking for several days under scorching heat. Your sandals feel more like painful leather mistakes, and your throat seems to have been personally cursed by Helios, the sun god. Suddenly, a soldier spots a small puddle. It is not a spring or a stream, merely a muddy, possibly frog-infested puddle, yet he scoops the water into his helmet. Now comes the legendary moment. That soldier offers it to Alex, the king of kings, vanquisher of Persian armies, and world conqueror. Alex merely gazes at the water, expresses his gratitude, and then pours it onto the ground in front of his men. This episode stands out as one of the most dramatic and thirst-filled moments in Alex's life. Not because of the water he accepted, but because of what he refused to drink. Now pause to consider why a helmet. In those ancient times, cookware was a luxury, but helmets were essential. They served as drinking vessels, bowls, head protection, and even emergency containers, a multifunctional, practical, albeit somewhat unhygienic tool. Alex's act was far more than about drinking water. It was a powerful performance meant to inspire and send a message. Morale was the main goal. If Alex, the most powerful leader alive, refused to drink until everyone had water, then even you, the foot soldier suffering from sunburn and trench foot, could endure as well. Was the water safe? Most likely not. Armies of ancient times did not have advanced water filters, yet that was not the point. In one fluid gesture, Alex transformed dehydration into a symbol of unity. It resembled a team-building exercise, but dustier and with more sandals involved. This story became legendary. Writers such as Arthur and Plutarch were fascinated by it. Here was a commander who led not just through strategy, but by shared hardship. He felt hunger, as his men did. He marched when they marched. And when the only available water appeared as if from an animal's hoof print, he still refused to drink before his troops. This was simply brilliant leadership. Anyone can share a meal, but choosing not to drink while others suffer is an act of emotional resilience and solidarity. So next time you complain about lukewarm bottled water, remember Alex once looked at a helmet filled with warm frog soup and said, "No thanks. I will wait." His soldiers admired him deeply for that. Conquering an empire came with certain benefits, one of which was culinary upgrades. When Alex advanced into Persia, he was not only met by anxious aristocrats and deserted palaces. He encountered banquets so lavish that Macedonian bread seemed like gravel in comparison. Persian cuisine did not hold back. These were the people who introduced the world to dishes like rice pilaf, saffron, and rich stews. The richness of the feasts marked a stark contrast to what Alex and his troops had known, highlighting the grandeur of the new lands he aimed to rule. Lamb served with pomegranate reduction accompanied approximately 47 varieties of sweets, each with a flavor reminiscent of honey bricks. Their royal feasts were spectacular displays, golden plates, crystal pitchers, and exotic fruits stacked like towering pyramids, alongside enough roasted meats to intimidate an entire woodland. Then there was Alex, king of simple khaki porridge and philosophical self-control, stepping into this intense culinary extravaganza as if he were a Spartan wandering through a modern marketplace. Did he indulge? Occasionally. He was not without appetite. Records show he sampled the saffron rice, date-filled pastries, and wine so potent it could be mapped. Yet, for the most part, he maintained a diet that was notably restrained. Bread, meat, and water remained his staples over the most lavish stews or gold-flaked figs. This was more than just taste. It was a deliberate choice. To Alex, excess was synonymous with weakness, and weakness led to the downfall of empires. While Persian aristocrats lounged on silk cushions enjoying stuffed quail, Alex chewed on his simple barley biscuit, perhaps yearning for it to carry more philosophical weight. Nevertheless, he allowed his soldiers to revel in the spoils. After enduring endless dust and tough goat meat, they earned a dozen nights of feasting. Roast lamb, grilled fish, honeyed cakes, each presented on dishes so ornate they might have been heirlooms. Yet Alex remained vigilant. He had witnessed the fate of rulers who succumbed too deeply to luxury. A soft stomach was a poor shield in battle. The battlefield was a harsh place, yet Alex was not entirely untouched by the flavors of Persia. A handful of Persian elements, such as rosewater and cinnamon, reportedly found their way into his meals. After all, enjoying good taste was never an act of betrayal. Indeed, Persia sent a lavish spread, and Alex eagerly sampled it. However, he continued to eat as though driven by the urgency of countless deserts to cross, foes to pursue, and a profound mistrust of anything too flashy on a plate. Alex never actually shared a meal with Philip III, but his pursuit of the Persian king ultimately brought him to dine because of him. After chasing the Persian ruler across the vast lands of Asia like the most relentless food courier, Alex came to possess more than just a throne. He inherited a whole culinary empire. This was no ordinary setup. It was a grand royal kitchen operation in full force. Philip did not travel with just a few cooks and a pot. Instead, he was accompanied by hundreds of chefs, bakers, spice experts, and tasting specialists whose duty was essentially to sample every dish in case it posed a threat to the king. The camp resembled less a military encampment and more a Michelin-starred traveling feast. When Philip fled and left behind his dining tent, Alex stepped into a realm of opulence previously reserved only for the gods and those with extremely delicate egos. The tables were weighed down by gold-covered plates, slow-cooked lamb, saffron-infused rice, grilled fish wrapped meticulously in fig leaves, and sauces aged longer than most Macedonian warriors could imagine. How did Alex respond? Like a man reared on simple foods and wary skepticism, he sat up straight, ready to face this extravagance with his usual resolute spirit. Alex reportedly ignored the couches and ate quietly, while everyone around him reclined, trying not to catch the gaze of the intensely focused conqueror. No slouching, no relaxing, just purposeful chewing with perhaps a hint of judgment. This was not disrespect, it was deliberate signaling. Alex was not about to be seen playing the role of some Persian prince. He wanted everyone, especially the former Persian nobles now awkwardly offering their allegiance, to understand he remained Macedonian, disciplined, and fully capable of smashing the table if things became too soft. However, let's not pretend he did not appreciate some variety. Sources reveal that Alex incorporated certain Persian dining traditions, such as multi-course feasts and occasional floral-scented wine. He was not above enjoying fine cuisine. He simply was above needing it. Therefore, no, he did not dine with Darius in the conventional sense, but he took Darius's seat, used Darius's silverware, and was surrounded by Darius's terrified chefs, which somehow made the experience even more satisfying. After all, revenge is best served on a golden platter accompanied by roasted goat and political conquest. Alex the Great was renowned for many things: tactical genius, relentless ambition, and world domination by the age of 33. But tonight's menu featured wine. A great deal of wine, enough to make the god Dionysus say, "Maybe take it easy." Despite his usual control, there were fleeting moments that were rare, dramatic, and tinged with a certain tragedy. When Alex fully committed to the goblet, the most notorious event unfolded in Persia. The victorious leader, surrounded by opulence and numerous yes-men, hosted an extravagant and fiery feast. What dishes were laid out? Probably an overwhelming array of Persian specialties such as roasted lamb, fragrant rice pilafs, spiced fruits, rich date syrups, and wine flowing as if it had debts to settle. Toasts were offered, lengthy, heartfelt, perhaps even featuring dramatic recitations of Homer and tearful laments over Achilles. Then came the unforgettable moment. After numerous rounds of increasingly blurred diplomatic exchanges, Alex, reportedly drunk but still commanding, chose to set fire to the royal palace at Pepololis. Why did this happen? Scholars continue to debate. Some believe it was a symbolic act. Others argue it was an act of vengeance. A few propose it was a drunken dare encouraged by his equally intoxicated companions. Everyone knows how it goes. Just a bit too much fermented grape juice, and suddenly you are burning down a world marvel. Alex awoke with the ancient form of a hangover and a slightly scorched empire. This may have been the earliest recorded instance of regret after overindulging in wine within military history. It was not an isolated example of drunken decision-making among rulers. Other tales describe conflicts erupting after banquets, including one grim night when Alex, in a fury fueled by alcohol, killed his close friend Philip. This was the same man who had once saved his life in battle. That fateful evening came to a tragic and unforgettable close. Vomiting, tears, and a crisis of existential magnitude. Just a typical Friday in Babylon. The main point is that for a man so fixated on control, alcohol was his sole vulnerability, and the greater his achievements became, the tougher it was to keep the wine and the flatterers from overwhelming him. So indeed, Alex occasionally drank excessively. When he did, he was neither king nor deity. He was simply a very drunk man with a poor sense of proportion and, unfortunately, access to flaming torches. The campaign into India was not merely a strategic move. It presented a culinary challenge for Alex and his weary troops, who subsisted mainly on flatbread. They had crossed burning deserts, climbed freezing mountain paths. Now they found themselves confronted with spices they could barely name, and creatures resembling siege engines with tusks. In terms of food, India was an astonishing discovery. This land offered lentils, rice, ginger, turmeric, tamarind, and enough spicy heat to transform a Macedonian soldier's helmet into a steam chamber. Ancient accounts, though somewhat unclear and admiring, report how the army faced completely novel tastes, curries, aromatic stews, and vegetables prepared more creatively than simply boiling until bland. Alex, known for his preference for simplicity, welcomed this experience. He was curious, flexible, and sufficiently self-aware to understand that disrespecting local cuisine while still invading would be unwise. He sampled their dishes. He honored their customs. He adapted. Alex did not master the art of cooking. That remained strictly someone else's responsibility. However, his soldiers were far less adaptable. Macedonian warriors were accustomed to simple fare such as meat, bread, and a dose of grumbling. Exotic lentils and unfamiliar fruits were often met with distrust, sometimes even vocal complaints that scared the elephants nearby. Legends suggest many troops longed for the humble barley stew, if one could even consider it a satisfied meal. Then the elephants appeared not as food but as formidable opponents on the battlefield. Ever practical, Alex likely glanced at a war elephant and remarked, "Okay, we are not eating that, but we must recruit some for our army." Yet Indian hospitality brought tables brimming with richly spiced dishes, goats cooked in aromatic spices, fried pastries, and sweet date confections. Although Alex maintained modest servings, he could not ignore the abundant generosity. Some accounts even say he sent these delicacies back to his soldiers to lift their spirits, an ancient military way of saying, "Try this and stop complaining." In the end, India influenced more than the empire's geography. It broadened their palates, increased their tolerance for spices, and tested their emergency bathroom planning. For a man who had once been content with salted onions for lunch, this was progress. One can conquer Persia, march across Egypt, enter India, and dine with kings, but eventually the lentils catch up with you. For Alex, no matter how far he roamed, the flavors of the land stayed with him. Numerous lavish feasts were set before him, yet he kept returning to the culinary equivalent of a casual shrug: boiled lentils. Simple, unassuming, and wonderfully textured somewhere between soft gravel and warm comfort lentils, became his steady dietary guide. Was this because he adored lentils? Probably not. No child dreams of one day controlling the world while slowly eating warm legumes. However, lentils were practical, nourishing, and, most importantly, politically neutral. They did not shout luxury, spark jealousy, or trigger diplomatic conflicts. They simply existed like sandals or a loyal but dull advisor. In a realm filled with rare delicacies and risky banquets, lentils were a safe choice. They were sourced from trusted origins, did not require interpretation, and definitely did not provoke palace fires. For a ruler sleeping with a dagger beneath his pillow, this was the perfect cuisine. Lentils had long been a fundamental part of the Greek and Macedonian diet. Rich in protein, easy to store, and prepared with just a pot, fire, and modest expectations. Add a splash of vinegar or oil, perhaps some crushed garlic for a touch of flair, and there you have the ancient equivalent of, "I'm too exhausted to cook." Some accounts suggest that even in Babylon, where every spice, roast, and delicacy was available, Alex still preferred straightforward meals, with lentils inevitably included. It was not a form of punishment. It embodied philosophy, a subtle nod to simplicity in a complex world. Discipline and perhaps a subtle display of status come to mind. Alex could have indulged in quail glazed with honey and wrapped in sheets of gold, yet he chose soft, earthy lentils instead. These lentils likely reminded him of his upbringing, of training sessions in the rugged Macedonian hills, of dinners shared with Arthur where every dish came with a lesson in ethics, and of military camps where the only constant sound was the faint crunch of eating something a little melancholic. Thus, the lentil made its return not with a grand announcement, but rather with a quiet drop into a wooden bowl. Alex, ruler of half the known world, lifted his spoon and ate. After all, even those of supreme status require fiber. When we picture royal treats, images of grapes peeled by nervous servants or delicate pastries served on shiny silver trays often arise, all while a harpist plays a profoundly emotional tune in the background. However, for Alex the Great, snacks were far less theatrical. Most snacks were taken on horseback during sieges or casually adjusting the borders of the known world. Convenience was paramount. Snack-worthiness was judged not by taste alone, but by whether it could endure being tossed in a saddlebag, trampled by a horse, and still remain edible. Enter dried figs, olives, roasted chickpeas, nuts, and chunks of aged goat cheese so solid that they could even be used as missiles. These were the granola bars of antiquity, dense, durable, and totally unbothered. Among them, dried figs were especially prized. Portable, sticky, and loaded with natural sugars. Energy. They provided Alex with a quick surge of endurance, which proved useful when conquering cities before midday. Olives were salty, oily, and notorious for leaving stains on your tunic during awkward diplomatic encounters. Yet they offered valuable electrolytes. Meanwhile, roasted chickpeas served as the ancient version of popcorn. Crunchy, satisfying, and abundant, albeit sadly without butter. Nuts, particularly almonds and walnuts, supplied protein, fat, and something to chew on while deciding whether to cross yet another mountain range. Alex's commanders probably carried similar provisions, sometimes wrapped in cloth or kept in small leather pouches. No modern containers, no airtight seals, merely dust-covered snacks passed around amid sword fights. And naturally, there was always road dust. Not deliberately eaten, but almost impossible to avoid. Everything bore a thin layer of it. The bread, the meat, the figs. It is no wonder ancient armies remained lean. They constantly nibbled on grit pretending it was seasoning. Some stories even claim that Alex, despite having access to luxurious food, often opted to eat like his soldiers. He did not want to seem removed or spoiled, choosing instead to munch on goat cheese while sitting on a rock with his men. That is ancient military camaraderie at its core. So royal snacks were not lavish. They were practical, durable, and mostly flavored by the surroundings, which for Alex tasted like determination, dust, and the occasional sweet fig. Every empire experiences moments of extravagant dining, and Alex's campaigns were no different. Although his everyday meals tended to be sensible and visually pleasing, there were occasional lavish banquets, especially after triumphs, during which unusual events unfolded. This was not your ordinary passing the salt scenario, but more like witnessing a fire-breathing performer. Celebratory feasts blended diplomacy with indulgence. Persian aristocrats struggled to conceal their emotions into golden napkins. Macedonian warriors questioned if the honey-coated reptile dish was a prank, and Alex presided over it all, striving to prevent the scene from erupting into chaotic, wine-driven conflicts. These gatherings showcased massive roasted creatures too immense for a single table, dishes of rice soaked in pomegranate juice, bird-shaped pastries, and wine served by attendants, adorned in more ornaments than garments. Entertainment featured live acts such as musicians, poets, acrobats, and possibly one or two elephants performing symbolic yet slightly intimidating stunts. However, the most unpredictable moments arose during the drinking toasts. According to Macedonian customs, consuming alcohol was not just allowed, but nearly a competitive sport. Participants sought to outdo one another through endless wine consumption, paired with passionate speeches. The ritual commenced with a toast to Alex and concluded with someone tearfully declaring their willingness to die for his sandals while sobbing into a roasted leg of lamb. One of the most notorious banquets spiraled out of control in Samarkand, where Alex attempted to combine Macedonian and Persian customs by hosting a feast that united both cultures, resulting in unforgettable and chaotic festivities. United as equals. A captivating vision, yet a monumental challenge. Language differences, cultural confusion, and the fact that Persian dishes often featured sauces, while Macedonian meals regarded salt as a luxury, created inevitable clashes that sometimes ended with a platter being upset. Occasionally, the oddities were unintended, like when Alex arranged a feast in a recently conquered town still carrying the scent of smoke, or when attendees presented extravagant tribute, such as live peacocks, honey-glazed camel supposedly, or a dessert requiring 6 attendants alongside immense patience. These gatherings transcended mere dining experiences. They acted as political declarations, displays of unity, morale lifters, and reminders of why the man from Thrace must be kept away from the wine container. Yes, Alex could host a celebration, but usually ate in moderation, drank with caution, and observed everything like a figure aware that history constantly recorded every detail. When Alex arrived in Babylon, he had evolved beyond just royalty. He had become a worldwide icon whose diet now blended tastes from Greece, Persia, India, and some mysterious preparation from Bactria. Of course, Babylon welcomed him with grandeur unmatched, presenting banquets surpassing even the spectacle of Olympic ceremonies, making them seem like simple communal meals. Babylonian cooks were experts in luxury, possessing access to grain-fed lamb, richly spiced date wines, and elaborate dishes that symbolized the peak of Alex's culinary expedition. An abundance of fruits and countless sauces were presented with style, often atop something gilded. Meals unfolded in multiple stages accompanied by music, incense, and a subtle aroma that might have been pride or fatigue, perhaps a mixture of both. Alex's dining table had transformed into a political spectacle. Sitting beside him were Persian governors, Indian ambassadors, Greek military leaders, and likely a philosopher or two, feigning comfort despite the presence of cumin. Yet, despite this grand display, Alex mostly ate in a straightforward manner. He avoided indulgence, resisted draping himself in honey, and maintained his old habits: bread, meat, and maybe some wine, even while peacocks stuffed with dates passed by. Part of this was self-restraint, part of it a strategic signal. Yes, I govern the world, but I remain humble enough to chew jerky like an ordinary soldier. Then came the ultimate banquet. Although accounts differ significantly, as ancient chroniclers were not known for rigorous accuracy, most sources agree that Alex attended an enormous feast, perhaps dedicated to a deity, a comrade, or simply celebrating another day survived. There was an abundance of food and much wine. Sometime afterward, he became seriously ill. Was it poison, an infection, malaria, or liver failure caused by years of intense global conquest? The truth remains a mystery. What we do know is that for 11 days, Alex was confined to bed, unable to speak, eat, or stand. The man who had conquered continents could barely even manage a sip of water. No detailed account exists of his final meal. It most likely was modest. It might have been a glass of wine or merely a moist cloth pressed to his lips. Ultimately, the ruler of vast empires followed the destiny of all humans, silently, modestly, and perhaps famished. Thus concluded the celebration. Thus concluded the man. In Babylon, the feast tables were cleared, and history took its place. Picture for a moment that Alex the Great found himself in today's world, his dusty cloak draped over his shoulder, a little bewildered by escalators, standing patiently in a food court line. What would he choose to eat? Let's be clear, Alex was not one for indecision or frivolity. He did not believe in creating your own meal from scraps. He would survey the options: fusion tacos, colorful smoothies, deep-fried everything, then likely opt for something straightforward, easy to carry, and packed with protein. He would bypass the sugar-coated trendy treats and head directly to a lamb gyro, approving the sight of the roasted meat, turning like a miniature war chariot. Barley energy bars would be familiar territory, along with lentil soup, a comforting classic. Grilled onions might make the cut, but only if their aroma evoked memories of victory and reckless impulses. Fast food would confuse him, yet its military-like efficiency might attract him. The concept of having a meal ready in less than 2 minutes would have seemed like sorcery in Macedon, though he would probably want to inspect the kitchen and maybe even take it over. Faced with a modern menu, he would have questions. Why is this dish named Caesar salad? Was he not attacked in the Forum once? Why is this chicken general acting so strangely? What legion did he lead? And after sampling a milkshake, he exclaimed, "This is wonderful. Which creature did you milk to produce sugar?" From a health perspective, he would likely flourish. His original regimen, low in carbohydrates and involving a 20-meter walk before breakfast, was already endorsed by modern influencers. The paleo diet is essentially his invention. The keto diet is merely a passing trend during election time. Yet, despite all this innovation, it is probable that Alex would still favor simplicity: a piece of flatbread, some roasted meat, and a cup of wine, naturally mixed since he was no barbarian. No flashy cupcakes, no avocado toast, and definitely no food served in mason jars. Why? Because Alex was more than just a man with an appetite. He was a man with a mission. Food was fuel and a means to an end. Sometimes it was a source of encouragement, but never the main focus. Therefore, if you ever find yourself struggling with what to order, just ask, would Alex eat this or would he conquer it? Suddenly, that lentil wrap might seem far less dull than before. In the final era of the ancient world, when the Mediterranean's greatest thinkers still gathered beneath colonnades to debate the universe's mysteries, a woman named Hypatia stood at the heart of it all. Born around 360 CE in the vibrant intellectual hub of Alexandria, she was not expected to take leadership, given the social norms of that era. Yet there she was, engaging not only in philosophy but also in science, challenging conventions at every turn. Her father, Theon, was a well-regarded mathematician and philosopher connected to the renowned Museum of Alexandria, a hub of knowledge that still preserved the fading heritage of the once powerful library. While most fathers taught their sons basic skills like reading and writing, Theon dedicated himself entirely to his daughter. He instructed Hypatia in arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and Platonic philosophy. She did more than just memorize ideas. She questioned them, argued about them, and shared her own teachings. By the time she became an adult, Hypatia had surpassed her father in both intelligence and influence. Her lessons attracted pupils from across the empire, including pagans, Christians, skeptics, and fervent believers. She taught openly in public spaces and lecture halls, dressed in her philosopher's cloak, capturing attention not through rank, but with exceptional clarity. She described celestial movement, conic sections, and number properties with such brilliance that many considered her almost divine. Hypatia was not a secluded scholar hidden away in dusty chambers. She moved confidently through the male-dominated society of late Roman Egypt, advising city leaders and even Roman governors. She symbolized the ancient classical world, one rapidly disappearing amid rising religious changes and political unrest. Yet Alexandria was no longer simply a city of books. It had become a fierce arena of faiths, with Christianity on the rise, paganism declining, and power struggles unfolding. Becoming more perilous than any complex formula, Hypatia's renown, her autonomy, and her role as an emblem of rational classical philosophy began to provoke jealousy and hostility among those who valued revelation above reason. Nevertheless, in those initial years, she remained beyond reproach. Hypatia represented the last beacon of a declining era, a woman admired not because she conformed to the male-dominated world, but because she soared well above it. In a time when women were expected solely to marry, have children, and avoid scholarly venues, Hypatia chose a path that was deeply unconventional. She embraced intellectual life. Remarkably, Alexandria allowed her to do this to some extent. Her very existence was revolutionary, yet her brilliance made any opposition difficult to sustain. Hypatia did not struggle her way into academic circles. She was welcome there. Her expertise in mathematics and astronomy placed her at the pinnacle of Neoplatonism, a philosophical school merging Plato's teachings with mystical concepts. This school explored profound topics such as the soul's progress, the nature of ultimate reality, and the connection between the physical and the divine realms, all conveyed with precise geometric reasoning. Her lectures were far from dull scholarly monologues. Hypatia's charisma attracted students not only from Alexandria, but also from distant parts of the empire, all eager to learn from her. Many were elite Roman men who ironically gained lessons in logic and self-control from a woman whom their own cultures might have demanded to silence. She taught openly, not in secrecy. She moved through the city wrapped in her philosopher's cloak, drawing attention in public forums and amphitheaters, frequently delivering speeches before diverse audiences. It was not just her intellect that fascinated people, but her personality as well. Hypatia was renowned for her simplicity and detachment from wealth or pleasure. She chose to remain unmarried, possibly on purpose, to preserve her freedom and philosophical integrity. There is a tale, probably fictional but revealing, about a student who tried to woo her romantically. She rejected him by throwing a bloodied menstrual cloth and saying, "This is what you truly desire, young man, not beauty." The message was unmistakable. Despite her stoic nature, she was far from unfeeling. Many of her pupils loved her not only as an educator, but also as a moral mentor. Some of them eventually became bishops, judges, and governors. Among them, Caius of Cyrene stood out as a devoted follower who became a Christian bishop, but retained deep respect for Hypatia throughout his life. His letters to her combined admiration, philosophical questions, and spiritual reflection. She was more than just an academic. Hypatia symbolized the timeless spirit of Alexandria, scientific, philosophical, tolerant, and dangerously intelligent at a time when the world was becoming increasingly intolerant. By the period when Hypatia was at the height of her intellect, the great library of Alexandria, once the pinnacle of mankind's knowledge, had already faded into a shadow of its glory. The original framework had been shattered by successive waves of conflict, disregard, and political turmoil. What remained was scattered throughout the city. Annexes, manuscripts hidden within private archives, and a handful of devoted scholars still holding on to the vision of universal wisdom. Among them, none shone more brightly than Hypatia. Although she was not officially appointed as the librarian of the remnants, many regarded her as the unofficial bearer of that heritage. She meticulously edited and safeguarded essential mathematical writings, especially the works by Diphantus and Apollonius. Some historians suggest she even played a role in designing the astrolabe and hydrometer, instruments vital for astronomy and scientific measurement. Indeed, she was not simply theorizing about the heavens. She actively helped create the very tools used to study them. Furthermore, her analysis of Ptolemy's Almagest, a highly intricate astronomical text packed with complex mathematical models describing planetary movements, was remarkable. While most people struggled even to pronounce the title, let alone refine its contents, Hypatia's revisions made this masterpiece clearer and more approachable for future scholars, ensuring it would endure through time. Ironically, her editorial work became the standard in Arabic translations centuries later, long after her name had faded from the memory of the Roman world. However, Hypatia did not guard knowledge selfishly. She was fiercely committed to sharing it widely. Her classroom was wherever she stood. Whether illustrating parabola curves or unpacking Plato's philosophical concepts, she never separated science and philosophy as isolated fields. For her, these were not separate fields, but a single immense web connecting the mind with the universe. This conviction earned her admiration, yet left her exposed. As Alexandria transformed, Christian leaders gained influence. Temples turned into churches, and growing distrust of pagan wisdom took hold. Hypatia, a thinker grounded in ancient teachings, came to be viewed not merely as an educator, but as a danger. A woman teaching astronomy over theology, one who questioned instead of submitting, publicly detached from religious affiliations. It was irrelevant that some of her pupils were Christians or that she did not openly oppose the church. What mattered was what she symbolized. Hypatia embodied the old era of reason and exploration, in a city shifting toward rigid beliefs that represented a greater threat than any written text. By the beginning of the 5th century, Alexandria had ceased to be the peaceful center of knowledge it once aimed to be. It had become a cauldron of religious zealotry, political power struggles, and violent confrontations on the streets. Whether she wished it or not, Hypatia had become more than a philosopher. She was now a figurehead, and such figures often draw hostile crowds. The conflict in the city was intense. On one side were the pagan and intellectual aristocracy, desperately holding on to the fading Greco-Roman legacy. On the other was the swelling force of Christianity, no longer oppressed, but an assertive power within the political sphere. At the center stood Roman officials striving to maintain order with the futility of a man attempting to dry the vast ocean with a mop. The newly chosen Christian bishop of Alexandria, Cyril, was ambitious, powerful, and determined to establish the church's dominance over the city. His counterpart was Orestes, the Roman governor, who, while a Christian himself, was politically prudent and somewhat more accepting of Alexandria's long-standing religious diversity. The two men harbored deep animosity toward each other, and in this volatile atmosphere, Hypatia inadvertently became a focal point of tension. She earned Orestes' respect, frequently acting as a trusted advisor, yet she remained firm in her religious neutrality, declining to convert, refusing to align with any faction, and resisting disappearance. At a moment when neutrality was equated with betrayal, this stance was problematic. The Christian populace, especially the more aggressive groups, began whispering that Hypatia was the cause of the conflict between Orestes and Cyril. They accused her of casting spells, influencing politics through pagan magic, and hindering Alexandria's Christian destiny. Naturally, these claims were baseless. However, in a city intoxicated by fanaticism and violence, irrational accusations spread faster than logic. Meanwhile, a group called the Parabolani, essentially religious enforcers or monks with physical strength, was growing in power under Cyril's authority. Initially formed to care for the sick and bury the dead, they gradually took on the appearance of a paramilitary force. The church exerted its authority openly on the streets. Among them was Hypatia, a brilliant and independent woman admired by Roman officials, steadfast in her pagan beliefs, confidently riding through the city as if she bore no danger. However, in Alexandria's shifting power structure, no one remained safe for long. Alex of Alexandria did not assume his role quietly. Taking over from his uncle Philip as bishop in the year 412, Alex inherited a church poised for domination and sought far more than a mere spiritual role. He was a man who used theology as a weapon and politics as a sharp tool. Alexandria, divided by conflicting beliefs, became the ideal battleground for his objectives. Alex's goals were clear and ambitious: to eliminate heresy and establish the church's authority above secular power. He acted swiftly, shutting down Novatian congregations, expelling Jewish residents, and increasing his influence both in the church and in the public sphere. His sermons were not only inspiring but also incited action. He understood how combining divine messages with physical intimidation created a powerful spectacle. The Parabolani, an unofficial force supporting the church, became his enforcers on the streets. Naturally, these actions did not please Orestes, the imperial governor. Although a Christian himself, Orestes upheld Rome's tradition of religious tolerance and opposed Alex's harsh tactics, especially when they violated civil laws. Their confrontation was inevitable. The relationship deteriorated more swiftly than a marble descending the steps of a temple. Alex attempted negotiation and sought to contain the conflict. However, what he faced in response was aggression. When a Christian crowd tried to kill him by throwing stones during a public speech, one monk named Ammonius was apprehended and put to death for the assault. Philip praised Ammonius as a martyr. The division had become an open wound. Caught in this intense struggle for control was Hypatia. She was admired by Alex but disliked by Philip's supporters, and impossible to overlook. Although she was not openly involved in politics, her sharp mind and sway posed a danger. Her very presence challenged the belief that only the church possessed true wisdom. A woman, a pagan, an astronomer, and a trusted advisor to Philip's fiercest opponent. These facts mattered more than her lack of military force or political ambition. In a city where religion and governance were inseparable, being neutral was the most perilous stance of all. Philip's silence amid the growing accusations against her would turn out to be profoundly telling. In Alexandria, when accusations of witchcraft begin, it is only a question of when someone will ignite the flames. By the year 414 of the Common Era, Alexandria had transformed into a place where evidence was unnecessary for condemnation, mere suspicion, and the weight of the crowd sufficed. Hypatia, once revered throughout the empire as an unparalleled philosopher, was now being painted in a sinister light by her adversaries. Whispers and rumors spread relentlessly. Rumors spread rapidly, claiming she was a sorceress, that she held Orestes under her influence, and that she was conspiring against the church. None of these accusations were grounded in truth, yet facts no longer held any sway. Much of the slander directed at Hypatia stemmed from her prominent public presence. She was a well-known figure, traveling in her chariot, teaching openly, and consulting with powerful leaders. Such boldness in a woman deeply offended the rigid mindset forming among Alexandria's religious extremists. To them, Hypatia embodied all that was wrong with the old order. She was female, a philosopher, and boldly unconverted. Whispers alleged she worshipped evil spirits, practiced forbidden magic, and that her astrolabes were enchanted devices used to control men's wills. In truth, these were merely scientific instruments. However, in a time dominated by religious fanaticism, science could easily be mistaken for witchcraft by those unwilling or unable to understand. One tale even claimed she obstructed peace between Orestes and Bishop Cyril. The faulty reasoning went like this. Hypatia counseled Orestes. Orestes opposed Cyril. Therefore, Hypatia must be the cause of their conflict. A neat little syllogism, convenient, straightforward, and dangerously false. Tensions in the city surged. It was no longer a question of if something would happen to Hypatia, but when and how violently. The Parabolani, once caretakers of the needy, had completely changed into fanatics. A restless tension churned beneath the surface. The city's predominantly Christian population, already ready to brand Hypatia as a perilous pagan sorceress, needed only the slightest encouragement to take action. That encouragement never surfaced openly from Cyril. He exercised extreme caution. However, his refusal to dismiss the accusations, to calm the growing frenzy, to stand up publicly for a woman he probably knew to be blameless, spoke volumes. After all, silence can serve as a powerful message. Gradually, the noose tightened around Hypatia, unseen and unheard, not with physical bonds, but through whispers and accusatory glances. Such an invisible prison emerges only when escape is impossible. This tragic episode unfolded in the spring of 415 CE. Hypatia, then in her mid-50s, still navigated Alexandria's streets in her chariot, continued teaching her pupils, and boldly lived contrary to the narrative spun by her adversaries. She was likely aware of the danger. Hostile stares had become commonplace, conversations hissed behind her back, and the air hung heavy with threat. Yet she persisted, a living symbol of defiance against fanaticism. Then suddenly they came to seize her. There was no formal trial or sanctioned execution. Instead, a furious mob, self-righteous and overflowing with hatred, led by the Parabolani and reportedly incited by a church reader named Peter, confronted her. They yanked her from her chariot, stripped her naked, and dragged her inside a church, a sanctified place transformed into a scene of brutality. What followed defies easy description and demands courage to recount. Various accounts, especially that of the historian Socrates Scholasticus, claim the crowd killed her using roof tiles or oyster shells, stripping the flesh from her bones. Others report that they tore her body apart piece by piece. What we do know for certain is that after her death, her remains were burned. This added insult seemed designed to wipe away all evidence of her existence, as though erasing her could justify the act. It was not a killing based on justice, but one driven by fierce passion, powered by ideology rather than any legal grounds. There was no trial, no judgment, only execution through fury. Alexandria lost more than just a woman on that day. It lost its last representative of the classical heritage, its final public philosopher, and perhaps its final symbol of the cosmopolitan spirit that had once defined the city. Orestes found himself unable to intervene. Cyril expressed sorrow but distanced himself from any blame. No arrests were made and no official investigations followed. The silence that had surrounded Hypatia's death was succeeded by more silence, and then a gradual fading from memory. Yet the damage had been done. With Hypatia's murder, a symbolic barrier closed on the age of reason in antiquity. It signaled the end of Alexandria as a hub of intellectual life and the beginning of its decline into rigid theological control. Her mutilated corpse served as the final mark of centuries of slow cultural decay. One scholar was killed, an entire world slipped away. In the weeks after Hypatia's violent death, Alexandria fell into an unnatural stillness. This was not because peace had been restored, but because fear and uncertainty had taken hold. Something vital vanished. The streets remained lively. Churches continued to chime unpredictably. Officials kept stamping documents routinely. Yet the spirit of the city, the free flow of ideas, that mixture of Arthur's philosophy, Roman rules, and Egyptian spirituality, had faded forever. There was no justice for Hypatia. No court hearing, no compensation. The official who had been responsible for arrests gradually faded from history. Some believe he abandoned Alexandria, finding it too politically fragmented to lead. Others suggest he was summoned back to Rome. Either way, the sole authority who sought to protect her had vanished. Bishop Cyril emerged more powerful after the upheaval. Although Cyril denied any role in her death, many interpreted his silence and speeches as tacit consent. He never pursued justice against the murderers or publicly condemned their actions. Eventually, he was even declared a saint, Saint Cyril of Alexandria, remembered chiefly for combating heresies rather than the philosopher whose blood was spilled during his tenure. Meanwhile, Hypatia's memory was quickly erased both physically and intellectually. Her name vanished from numerous documents. Her works were lost, her lessons credited to others, and her achievements in mathematics and astronomy dispersed in history with little acknowledgement. In an instant of historical time, one of the brightest minds of late antiquity was reduced to a faint echo. Yet echoes persist. Centuries on, Hypatia's story still resonates. Her story began to re-emerge first in the works of Renaissance humanists who regarded her as a martyr for rational thought. Later, in Enlightenment gatherings, she became a symbol of intellectual liberty oppressed by rigid dogma. By the 19th and 20th centuries, she was once again celebrated. This female philosopher, the last custodian of Alexandria's ancient knowledge, became a sorrowful figure whose death signified the fading of classical civilization. Yet, much of what we understand about Hypatia today comes mainly from male perspectives. Students such as Saius, historians like Socrates Scholasticus, and chroniclers from subsequent eras attempted to reconstruct a fragmented mosaic of her life. Her own voice was silenced, but this silence turned into a powerful echo. Despite centuries of quiet, Hypatia refused to vanish from memory. Her name, almost wiped out at one point, resurfaced in every era that challenged authority and cherished the quest for truth. She transcended being just a historical personality and transformed into a symbol. Not only was she seen as a slain scholar, but also as an embodiment of the idea that reason must stand firm even when the world descends into violence. During the Renaissance, intellectuals revived her story and honored her as a martyr against ignorance. In the Age of Enlightenment, philosophers and skeptics cited Hypatia as a striking example of the consequences when religion suppresses inquiry. Voltaire expressed anger over her fate, portraying her death as the decisive blow to classical education. She was immortalized as a tragic heroine in dramas, poetry, and later novels. Frequently exaggerated yet consistently admired, her story continues to inspire scientists, feminists, and secular advocates alike in modern times. To mathematicians, she represents one of the earliest recorded women in their domain, a trailblazer paving the way for those still striving for inclusion within STEM fields today. For women in philosophy, she emerges as a seminal figure who was not only an active participant in intellectual circles, but also played a crucial role in shaping them. To humanists, she serves as a powerful reminder of how precarious knowledge becomes when faced with the forces of fear. However, Hypatia's impact extends beyond symbolism. Although much of her original writing has been lost, scholars believe her influence persists within the continued existence of Greek mathematical manuscripts. Her annotations and interpretations likely formed the foundation for texts that were later translated into Arabic and eventually absorbed into European scholarly traditions. Thus, even in silence, her mark remained imprinted on the tools of education. There is a deep irony in the fact that the violent crowd who destroyed her aimed to obliterate not only the woman, but also everything she represented. Nevertheless, Hypatia survived, not within temples or churches, but within the collective memories of generations determined to preserve her legacy. Today, statues honor her image, educational institutions bear her name, and intellectuals across various fields invoke her legacy whenever society appears to succumb to ignorance. She stands as more than Alexandria's fading beacon. She challenges all of us to express ourselves clearly, think courageously, and never shrink away from opposition. Because truth, much like Hypatia, may suffer but never shatters. Hidden beneath a tranquil area of the Italian Alps, only 30 meters from Turin, lies a secret that seems unbelievable. It is absent from any conventional map and remains unknown to tourists. There are no remnants of Roman times or medieval churches in sight. Instead, buried beneath the mountain village of Vidraco is a vast hand-carved underground network, a maze of sacred rooms called the temples of humankind. For almost 2 decades, no one beyond a small spiritual circle was aware of their existence. This is no ordinary cave with a few decorations. The temples extend over 5 floors, linked by corridors, spiral stairways, and domes that could rival the grandeur of monumental cathedrals. They are adorned with sacred paintings, mosaics, stained glass, cosmic symbols, and golden altars, all meticulously sculpted, painted, and crafted by hand. It feels as though someone attempted to recreate the Sainte-Chapelle underground and then incorporated Egyptian hieroglyphs, Buddhist mandalas, Mayan glyphs, and celestial charts to enrich the space. But who constructed this marvel? It was not the Vatican, nor any secret society with age-long traditions. Instead, it was an obscure spiritual group named Damanhur, inspired by an ancient Egyptian city believed to be the heart of Horus worship. Established in 1975, the community dreamed of a society rooted in unity, independence, and spiritual growth. The temples stand as their tangible expression of this vision, a powerful symbol brought to life beneath the earth. A sacred place intended to realign human awareness with the cosmos. The project started in 1978, led by Oberto Ayaldi, who had shifted from being an insurance broker to a mystical visionary. Without official approval, lacking detailed plans, and using only manual tools, Audi and his team dug into the rock beneath a private residence. They worked under the cover of darkness, used the excavated earth to shape the landscape of the surrounding hills, and kept everything a secret. This was a form of spiritual rebellion, creating covertly what they believed could not be publicly constructed. Remarkably, they succeeded in staying undiscovered for 17 years. Nobody suspected that behind the modest appearance of a rural house, a group of artists, engineers, and devotees was crafting an underground masterpiece. This remained hidden until the 1990s, when a dissatisfied former member alerted the authorities. The Italian police, expecting to uncover a bunker or a tax refuge, instead encountered one of the most extraordinary subterranean creations in contemporary Europe. The temples of humankind were not spontaneous inventions. They emerged from a bold and unusual vision conceived by a man named Oberto Iraudi, whom his followers later called Falco. In the 1970s, Iraudi had not yet become a spiritual leader. He held a typical job as an insurance agent in northern Italy, but inside, he was consumed by interests in metaphysics, reincarnation, ancient cultures, and what he described as the memory of the universe. From an early age, he claimed to have been fascinated by these mysteries. Alex experienced vivid memories of past lives. Not simply unclear feelings, but detailed visions revealing existences in lost civilizations, including Atlantis and ancient Egypt. He was convinced these recollections were not mere fantasies, but actual blueprints. One of these blueprints, he explained, was for a temple, not figurative, but a real sanctuary meant for spiritual awakening. This sanctuary was intended to be hidden underground and built by a community united by a shared purpose. In 1975, Alex gathered a small group of people who shared his vision in the Alpine foothills. They all dreamed of a self-sustaining, spiritually advanced society. The group chose the name Damanhur, inspired by the Egyptian city of the same name, believed to be a center of Horus worship and esoteric wisdom. Their aim was not to establish a new religion, but to create a new kind of society, combining science, art, ecology, and spirituality. Damanhur quietly grew as members abandoned their former lives to embrace communal living in the Italian countryside. They engaged in meditation, sacred dance, and developed a unique language they believed enhanced subtle communication. The community also introduced their own currency and delved into ancient scriptures, claiming they could converse with trees. To outsiders, their activities appeared either endearing or peculiar. Yet to the group, they were preparing for a cosmic rebirth. Hidden beneath all this was a deeper secret. Construction had already started. Alex insisted he had seen the temple in a vision. Driven by visions and a deep conviction that it was his fate, Alex set out to construct it. Armed with picks, hammers, buckets, and unwavering determination, the members of Damanhur began their excavation without knowing if they would ever complete their task or if they might be discovered. Their effort was more than just carving stone. They were shaping a belief, creating a sanctuary intended not for today, but for a future they firmly trusted was coming. From the outside, the house on the hilltop in Vidraco appeared completely ordinary. It was simply a modest mountain home, quietly overlooking the valley below. Yet, beneath its floors, concealed by a secret trapdoor hidden under a carpet, lay the entrance to a constantly expanding tunnel. Under the cover of darkness and silence, the people of Damanhur engaged in what can only be called an architectural miracle, manually building an immense underground temple. The construction started in the year 1978. There were no cranes, backhoes, or teams of engineers with hard hats, just a small group wielding pickaxes, hammers, and lanterns. They dug into solid rock with basic tools, carrying debris out one bucket at a time, often laboring through the night to stay hidden. The earth removed was quietly spread across the surrounding area, shaping gardens and terraces, so no trace of their work showed above. The task was extremely perilous. The project was unauthorized, no safety regulations applied. One tiny error could have caused a cave-in, trapping them beneath the surface forever. But despite the risks, the team pressed on relentlessly. The Damanhurans were convinced they were shielded by faith, fate, and the wisdom of higher beings. This was more than simple construction. It was a sacred ceremony. Each hammer strike was an act of devotion. Ayaldi or Falco said he had already envisioned the temple in a dream, seeing every chamber, corridor, and golden altar. His drawings directed the design. Domes symbolizing various spiritual concepts connected through corridors filled with art and light. Every room served a purpose such as meditation, healing, or energy balancing. The structure was inspired by sacred geometry and mystical symbols rather than practical modern use. Even as more people joined, the secrecy remained intact. Families shared tales about their children growing up playing above the temple's floors, completely oblivious to what lay beneath them. Remarkably, for almost 15 years, no neighbor noticed anything unusual. No one curious wandered through the wrong door. No official ever came knocking. By the early 1990s, they had hollowed out an underground area vast enough for several floors of ornate halls, all without a single outsider discovering it. This achievement was a blend of human endurance, madness, creativity, or maybe all these qualities combined. They were not simply erecting a temple. They were challenging the present era to show that something ancient could still emerge, hidden below. For nearly 17 years, the temples of humankind remained among Europe's best-kept secrets. However, As with all hidden truths, this one eventually came to light. Not quietly, but with a loud uproar. In the year 1992, a former member of Damon, harboring resentment after a conflict with the leadership, chose to inform the Italian authorities about an underground complex. He insisted that beneath the Alps lay an enormous unauthorized structure, one that had never been registered, inspected, or officially sanctioned. To the government officials, this claim seemed unbelievable. A whole temple network supposedly built by a secret cult without raising any suspicion. Nevertheless, they had no choice but to investigate. When the police arrived at the location in Vidraco, they expected to find perhaps an illegal basement or a modest bunker at worst. What they uncovered was far beyond their expectations. Passing through a hidden trapdoor, they descended into expansive halls adorned with mosaics that shimmered, golden altars, and stained glass that cast colorful light, all deeply underground. Marble columns supported vaulted domes, and sacred symbols from a wide variety of spiritual traditions decorated the walls. The officers stood in awe. Some accounts suggest they thought they had stumbled upon a forgotten civilization. The vast size and exquisite craftsmanship of the temples were astonishing. This was not merely a clandestine chamber. It was a complex architectural masterpiece, built out of solid rock and concealed openly. News about this discovery spread rapidly, provoking a mix of curiosity, anger, and governmental confusion. The Italian authorities, initially shocked, immediately issued an order to halt all work at the site. Authorities issued a mandate threatening to close the entire site permanently because no permits had been submitted and there were serious doubts about the building's safety. Yet, something surprising occurred. Instead of reacting with fear or mockery, the public became fascinated. Images of the chambers, especially the Hall of Mirrors and the Blue Temple, started to spread through Italian newspapers. People were genuinely intrigued. Who were these creators? How had they constructed such wonders? And for what purpose? Facing the possibility of being wiped out or losing their claim, Damon decided to open their doors. They welcomed officials, reporters, and even doubtful scientists to explore the temples. What everyone observed was unmistakable. This was not the work of a secret sect, but rather a grand artistic and spiritual achievement. In trying to suppress their vision, Damon had inadvertently built a masterpiece. Now the entire world wanted access. Once the secret was revealed, there was no turning back. With demolition hanging over them, the Damana community made a courageous decision: total openness. Instead of hiding or denying their creation, they invited the world inside. It was a risky move, but it brought incredible results. Journalists, archaeologists, engineers, and even hesitant government representatives were guided into the mountain to witness what had been carved below the surface. What they discovered resembled less a hidden cult hideout and more an underground Vatican merged with Arthur's imagination. There stood the Hall of Mirrors, a vast chamber lined entirely with reflective surfaces. Walls adorned with stained glass ceilings and floors covered in tiles reflected light like a vibrant mosaic of energy. There stood the Hall of Earth shaped like a chalice, honoring the feminine essence and ancient earth goddesses. Each temple was crafted with meticulous care, not only artistically, but also energetically synchronized with what the Daemonhurans considered to be synchronic lines, cosmic channels of energy weaving across the planet. The architecture was designed to resonate with these lines, enhancing their power and transforming the site into a kind of spiritual engine. Italian officials, confronted with growing public interest and media attention, found themselves facing a dilemma. Although the temples were technically unlawful, tearing them down would mean destroying a contemporary artistic masterpiece that had captured the collective imagination. In an unusual act of bureaucratic leniency, the authorities opted for regulation instead of destruction. Instead of closing the complex, they permitted Daemonur to maintain ownership under strict conditions concerning safety and preservation. Structural engineers assessed the strength of the buildings. Historians meticulously documented the symbolic meanings. Artists simply admired in silence. By the middle of the 1990s, these temples had shifted from a hidden secret to a celebrated cultural phenomenon. The community began offering guided tours and spiritual retreats. Filmmakers and photographers recorded every corridor. Some critics remained skeptical, naturally, but the intrigue far surpassed the opposition. What had long been concealed was now open to the world. In a curious twist, the very secrecy that once shielded the temples transformed into their most powerful form of promotion. People no longer visited merely to admire the art. They came to experience a miracle that defied reality. The mountain had guarded its secret for ages, and now it quietly shared it with all who would listen. At first glance, the temples of humanity might appear as an eccentric artistic experiment filled with vibrant colors, symbols, and cosmic energy. Yet, to the Daemonurans, every detail held profound significance. This space was far more than sacred. It functioned as a device for expanding consciousness, a mystical instrument designed to enhance spiritual forces, awaken hidden human abilities, and realign mankind with the universe. Central to Daemon's teachings is the idea that Earth is woven with synchronic lines, energetic pathways comparable to ley lines or acupuncture channels. According to their beliefs, these lines connect sacred sites worldwide, such as the pyramids, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, and the recently discovered subterranean temples in Vidraco. The temples were deliberately constructed at the crossroads of these energy currents, transforming them, in Daemonurian understanding, into interdimensional power hubs. Each room inside the temples embodies a unique spiritual theme. For example, the Hall of Water focuses on past lives and emotional restoration, while the Hall of Spheres acts as the temple's energetic core, designed to facilitate communication with higher realms. Intelligences and civilizations from afar are not just a metaphor for the Daemonurans. They truly hold the belief that consciousness extends beyond Earth and that the temples serve as a signal. This is more than mere symbolism. The community integrates sound, geometry, and the resonance of materials into the design to awaken these energies. Copper coils are embedded within the walls. Quartz crystals are arranged to reflect specific frequencies. Every detail, from hues to symbols and materials, is selected based on how it harmonizes with human awareness and planetary vibrations. Visitors often recount unusual sensations, describing waves of energy, mysterious sounds, or entering altered states of mind. Whether it is simply the placebo effect or something more tangible, the temples appear to influence people. Even some skeptical scientists have observed unusually intense electromagnetic phenomena in certain rooms. Yet, for the Daemonurian believers, science merely validates what they already understand. This temple is alive, interacting with intention, feelings, and thought. It works as a connection not only between Earth and the cosmos, but also between who we currently are and what we might evolve into. In their vision, the temples of humanity represent not a remnant of history, but a model for what lies ahead. Though the underground temples are the most visually impressive feature of Daemonur, they represent only one part of a wider spiritual endeavor. Above the surface, the Federation of Daemon operates as a form of intentional micronation, fully realized. Daemonur operates with its own constitution, currency, schools, and even a unique system for measuring time. Believe it or not, they follow their own calendar that began in 1975, the year the Federation was established. According to Daemonurian reckoning, we are now in the year 50-something. This community is divided into eco-villages, each dedicated to a particular role, such as farming, arts, research, healing, or temple duties. Daily life combines spiritual practices with everyday tasks. Residents cultivate their own food, join group meditations, and attend weekly social alchemy gatherings aimed at harmonizing individual spiritual growth with the group's shared evolution. At its height, Daemonur had over 1,000 members representing more than 30 countries. Joining is not a casual affair. New members go through an initiation and are encouraged to embrace communal living, surrender some personal belongings, and share their skills with the community. These talents vary from sculptors to software developers, since everyone must contribute to the collective. Education is central to life in Daemonur. Children learn traditional subjects like math and language alongside sacred geometry, ancient myths, and energy awareness. There is even a Daemonhurian university that offers classes in esoteric sciences, spiritual physics, and alternative healing techniques. If the image of a wizarding school powered by solar panels comes to mind, you are not far from the truth. At the heart of this philosophy is the belief that divinity is present in everyone. The community believes that humanity's mission is to awaken to its role as a co-creator alongside the universe. This involves living in harmony with nature, delving into consciousness, and employing creativity as a spiritual instrument. To those outside, this group might appear unusual or even cult-like, but there is no single God, no imposed doctrine, and no dominating leader. Leadership operates democratically, with roles regularly switching. Members have the freedom to leave whenever they choose, and many do. There are critics as well. Some former participants mention internal tensions, strict beliefs, or emotional exhaustion. Yet, even opponents acknowledge that this community is unlike anything else on the planet. Damhor is more than just a commune or a spiritual haven. It is a continuous social experiment where individuals genuinely strive to embody a myth rather than merely read about one. To step inside the temples of humanity is to enter a cosmos woven from symbols. Every surface, from walls to ceilings to floors, carries layers of significance that are mythological, mathematical, and cosmological. However, Damhor does not regard art as simple ornamentation. For them, art is sacred technology, a means to awaken the spirit, unlock ancient recollections, and communicate with the divine silently. Their visual style is far from arbitrary. It intertwines Egyptian imagery, Celtic spirals, Hindu gods, and futuristic celestial charts. One chamber might show the Eye of Horus, while another presents stylized strands of DNA or cosmic alignments. These are not merely decorative designs, they are deliberate codes spoken by Damhor residents. The language of the soul communicates directly, bypassing rational thought and awakening profound levels of understanding. But why do they combine so many traditions and cultures? According to their philosophy, all myths are pieces of a vast, universal truth. These stories, told in various languages, all point towards the same cosmic origin. The temples do not claim to replicate a single faith. Instead, they aim to unify them, not through a dull mixture, but through a thoughtful blending of humanity's spiritual legacy. Another fascinating aspect is the question of language, or more precisely, multiple languages. Damanhur created its own sacred tongue, simply called sacred language. While the name lacks creativity, it accurately describes a system of thousands of ideograms, each crafted to express spiritual ideas that everyday language supposedly cannot convey. These symbols appear engraved in stone and glass throughout the temples, shimmering with gold leaf, carved into vibrant marble, and hovering above entrances like luminous incantations. To the community, these signs are not inventions, but rediscoveries. Falco proposed that this language originates from ancient civilizations existing before recorded history, potentially even of extraterrestrial origin. In essence, these symbols are not newly formed but uncovered, serving as spiritual relics from a distant, enlightened era. Visitors often describe the feeling of entering the temples as deeply moving, sometimes even overwhelming. Many shed tears. Some report experiencing an uncanny sense of recognition, as if they are recalling something long forgotten. Forgotten, and that is precisely the essence. These temples are not created to clarify, but to inspire. In Damanhur, truth is not conveyed through lessons. It is stirred through narrative, imagery, and the quiet moments between spoken words. The temples built by humankind were never intended as mere relics of history. They stand and continue to serve as blueprints for what is to come, not only for spiritual evolution but also for cultural progress, where architecture, awareness, and social bonds merge into something unprecedented. While the surface world speeds ahead with technological advances and growing divides, beneath Vidraco, everything unfolds deliberately and carefully, as if painted stroke by stroke. Even now, the temples remain unfinished. Damhur views them as a living entity that perpetually grows. New rooms get created, older ones restored, Murals receive fresh touches, and new symbols appear to resonate with the shifting energies within the community. Unlike conventional sacred places fixed in time, the temples of humankind are alive. They evolve alongside the creators who continue nurturing them. Over the years since their unveiling, Damhur has broadened worldwide influence. The Federation encompasses centers abroad, offers virtual classes, and attracts a constant flow of international guests seeking spiritual renewal, energy work, or mere exploration. Though some come anticipating superficial New Age concepts, many depart profoundly moved, not necessarily converted, yet struck by the extraordinary vision behind it all. Ultimately, how many communities build so wonderfully? Building cathedrals from scratch underground seems like a secret. However, Damanhur is not free from its detractors. Doubters raise questions about some of its assertions, such as past lives, lines of synchronicity, and communication beyond the stars. Others express concern over the cult-like fervor or the level of dedication demanded from its followers. Yet, despite everything, the Federation has persisted, not by shutting itself off, but by welcoming outsiders. Today, these temples stand as emblems of possibility. They showcase what emerges when artistry, purpose, and community unite. They remind us that the magnificent sacred places of ancient times, the pyramids, cathedrals, and ziggurats, were not merely constructions. They represented collective faith in physical form. Damon challenges us to consider why humanity ceased building in such a grand, meaningful way. Maybe the true heritage of these temples lies not in their doctrines, but in their fearless ambition. In a world consumed by speed and spectacle, an ordinary group chose to dig deep into the ground to create something sacred by hand, quietly, solely for beauty and spirit. This is more than just a temple. It is a question etched in stone. What are you creating in your own life? Long before satellites circled the globe or sailors called out "land ho," humans were already on the move, mapping coastlines, crossing deserts, and sketching their vision of the world onto clay, stone, or skins. Travel was more than curiosity, it was essential to survival. The earliest explorers were not thrill seekers. They were gatherers and seekers of sustenance. Travelers, gatherers, and those fleeing danger all moved for survival. Yet with time, movement evolved beyond mere necessity. It became a deliberate tactic and finally transformed into a heritage. The earliest cartographic efforts were not elaborate artistic creations. Instead, they appeared as crudely drawn shapes on cavern walls, engravings on bones, or mental maps shared orally. Around 2300 BCE, the Babylonians carved one of the oldest known maps onto a clay tablet. It did not portray the entire world, but rather a specific area marked by rivers, settlements, and mountains. To the Babylonians, the earth was imagined as a flat circle encircled by a cosmic sea, with Babylon positioned at the center. Although geographically imprecise, the map revealed an even deeper meaning: intention. The Babylonians sought to grasp their environment. They wished to find their way. But how could one journey without roads, signs, or star charts? You observe the sun. You study the stars. You commit landmarks, migrating animals' routes, and wind directions to memory. If fortune favors you, you hand down this knowledge to someone whose memory is even sharper. Ancient Polynesians, for example, excelled at navigation by reading ocean waves, bird flight patterns, and star alignments. At the same time, merchants in Mesopotamia navigated river paths such as the Tigris and Euphrates, transforming seasonal floods into trade channels. In these early societies, travel was seldom solitary. It was collective, slow-paced, and filled with risks. Those who traveled faced threats from thieves, storms, illness, and the possibility of disappearing without a trace. Trade not only moved merchandise, but also languages, ideas, and technologies across various regions. Routes for commerce began to emerge like channels flowing through the ancient world's body. Exploration did not have to reach new continents to spark transformation. Often, simply traveling to the next city-state, the following oasis, or the nearby fertile valley was revolutionary enough. These small advancements wove together a complex network of connections that laid the foundation for civilization itself. Therefore, when discussing ancient exploration, It involves more than distant expeditions. It embodies a deep-seated desire to discover what lies beyond the visible edge and to imprint one's presence on the unknown. The ancient Egyptians were not known for far-reaching travels, yet when they journeyed, they did so with grandeur, rituals, and usually an armed caravan. The Nile served as their main thoroughfare, offering much more than leisurely voyages. Pharaohs sent missions southward to Nubia, eastward into the Sinai Peninsula, and even farther to enigmatic territories such as Punt, a semi-legendary land referred to as God's Land by the Egyptians. Its exact position remains uncertain, with speculations including Somalia, Eritrea, and southern Arabia. Although no one can say for sure, it is clear that Egyptians dispatched ships filled with goods and prayers, intending to come back with valuable items like incense, gold, rare animals, and enhanced spiritual status. One of the most renowned documented trips took place during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, Egypt's powerful female ruler, who around 1478, before the Common Era, initiated an expedition to Punt, and the expedition was proudly documented on the walls of her mortuary temple at Dea el-Bahi. The engravings show enormous ships, men carrying myrrh trees, and locals with distinctive facial features and intricate headdresses. This was not merely commerce, it combined diplomacy, propaganda, and spiritual purpose into a single event. Egyptians also explored the Sinai Peninsula not solely for conquest, but to extract turquoise and copper. These missions often involved hundreds of laborers, scribes, soldiers, and priests. Travel was organized by the state and carefully recorded. Pharaohs did not send out casual adventurers. They deployed well-planned logistical operations. Officials chronicled everything, from what was mined, who took part, to the offerings made to the gods for a safe journey. Though surrounded by deserts, Egypt was not isolated. Caravans traversed the western desert, linking oases and bringing goods from as far away as Libya. Sea voyages, although perilous, enabled contact with Byblos, Crete, and other ports in the eastern Mediterranean. Nevertheless, ancient Egyptian travel was far from easy. Whether by land or water, expeditions were slow, dangerous, and expensive. Yet they were considered vital extensions of the divine order. When the pharaoh moved, Egypt moved with him, and each expedition reinforced their worldview that Egypt was the center of the cosmos. Everything else, whether ally, enemy, or foreigner, existed to be understood, subdued, or respected. For the Phoenicians, exploration was not an act of defiance against the deities. Rather, it was an offering to them. While ancient Egypt focused inwardly on its river and gods, the Phoenicians gazed outward across the ocean, constructing vessels to pursue the farthest horizon. Emerging around 1500 years before the Common Era from the coastal cities of Byblos, Tyre, and Sidon in what is now Lebanon, the Phoenicians did not seize territories. Instead, they mastered the waters. Through this mastery, they became the most courageous sailors and merchants of the ancient world. They were not a traditional empire with vast armies or monumental ziggurats. Instead, they created something arguably even more remarkable, a network. The Phoenicians established commercial routes spanning the Mediterranean Sea, connecting the Levant to North Africa, Cyprus, Sicily, Spain, and even reaching the mysterious entrance of the Atlantic Ocean at the Strait of Gibraltar. Along their voyages, they founded cities, the most renowned being Carthage, which would eventually rival Rome itself. What was the key to their success? Their ships. Phoenician vessels were elegant, swift, and resilient. Combining oars and sails, they featured tall hulls for protection and curved shapes that effortlessly cut through waves. These ships were much more than simple transportation. They were mobile marketplaces filled with cedar wood, glassware, fabrics dyed with their famous purple pigment, and their alphabetic script carved into stone, traded like advanced technology. Indeed, the Phoenicians gifted the world one of the earliest known alphabets and left a legacy that shaped communication and commerce forever. One of the most powerful tools for human connection is the alphabet. Its creation marked a major shift in writing, moving away from complex forms like cuneiform and hieroglyphs to a simple system consisting of only 22 symbols. This system later inspired the development of Greek and Latin alphabets, eventually shaping the letters we use today. However, journeys for the Phoenicians were filled with danger. Pirates hunted the seas, violent storms could shatter vessels, and every new port held the threat of hostile inhabitants or fierce trade rivalry. Despite these challenges, they persevered, not as conquerors, but as bridges between cultures. They transported tin from Britain, silver from Iberia, papyrus from Egypt, and spices from Arabia. Some historians, including Herodotus, even suggest that Phoenician sailors sponsored by Egypt managed to sail around Africa as early as the 6th century before Christ. Although this is a daring assertion, if anyone in ancient times could have accomplished such a voyage, it would likely have been the Phoenicians. They did not erect great monuments, but rather established connections, mapping the ancient world through wind, waves, and commerce. While seafarers in the Mediterranean traveled across the waters, trading from city to city, far to the east, a different kind of journey unfolded, slower, dustier, yet equally revolutionary. In ancient China, travel did not often involve ships. Instead, caravans crossed vast deserts, navigated winding mountain paths, and endured some of the harshest landscapes on Earth. This marked the origin of what we today refer to as the Silk Road, a sprawling network of routes that linked continents and fostered exchange across great distances. The overland routes connected East Asia with the Middle East, Central Asia, and finally Europe. Their beginnings date back to the Han Dynasty around the 2nd century before the Common Era, when Emperor Wu of Han dispatched an envoy named Zhang Qian westward to form alliances against nomadic raiders. Although Zhang Qian did not succeed in his political task, he unexpectedly uncovered entire civilizations beyond China's western borders. He returned years later bringing news of Persian merchandise, Central Asian horses, and unique cultures. While the emperor was displeased with the delay, he became intrigued by the new prospects. Trade pathways soon flourished. Chinese traders started exporting silk, lacquerware, spices, jade, and porcelain, items so coveted that they turned into symbols of prestige stretching from India to Rome. In exchange, caravans brought horses, glassware, wool, and gold back to China. Yet, it was not only goods that journeyed along these trails. Ideas, innovations, and faiths crossed frontiers as well. Buddhism migrated from India into China. Artistic trends blended together. Musical instruments were shared. Even paper, invented in China, would eventually reach the West and transform how written information was transmitted. Traveling the Silk Road was harsh and dangerous. Caravans trekked through the Taklamakan Desert, known as the place from which no one returns. Fierce sandstorms could engulf travelers. Bandits waited in isolated mountain passes. Moreover, the vast distance, spanning thousands of miles from Chang'an, today's Xi'an, to cities like Samarkand or Antioch, posed immense challenges. Journeys along this ancient network could extend for many months or even several years. Explorers depended on oasis towns where small trading hubs thrived like vibrant green gems scattered across the arid desert. Cities such as Dunang, Kashgar, and MV became vital points of refuge and exchange. No single empire held total control over the entire route. Instead, a mosaic of kingdoms, tribes, and independent city-states maintained sections of the path, collecting tolls on all who passed. Despite its complex nature, this system functioned effectively, weaving a web of connections that transformed the ancient world. The Silk Road was far from a lone, continuous path. It acted as a circulatory system, spreading vitality, ideas, and ambition throughout continents. While formidable barriers like deserts, rivers, and seas challenged travelers, the Persian Empire adopted a different strategy. They constructed roads, long-lasting, sturdy, and meticulously maintained, not solely for the military or commerce. For the Achaemenid Persians, roads represented the infrastructure of empire, a method to unify disparate conquered territories, languages, and traditions into a cohesive structure. Central to this grand plan was the royal road commissioned by Darius the Great in the 5th century before the Common Era. This extensive route stretched over 1,500 miles, linking Susur in Persia to Sardis near the Aegean Sea. This arterial highway connected the far reaches of the empire from east to west, allowing couriers, traders, and generals to travel vast stretches with remarkable speed. Thanks to a network of relay stations stocked with fresh horses and provisions, royal messengers could traverse the entire road in just 7 to 9 days. This achievement was truly remarkable. This was a remarkable accomplishment for the era. To put it into perspective, an ordinary traveler or a caravan would typically require about 3 months to cover the same distance. Yet, the route was not only swift, it was also secure. Constant patrols, strongholds, and strategically placed outposts guaranteed protection for those journeying under the king's banner. People from throughout the empire, including Babylonian scribes and Greek emissaries, relied on this royal route not just to transport goods, but to share ideas, spread rumors, and influence politics. In many respects, it functioned as the empire's information superhighway. The network of Persian roads reached far beyond the primary route, connecting cities such as Ecbatana, Persepolis, and Babylon, while extending towards Egypt, India, and Central Asia. Rest stops, known as caravansaries, provided shelters and provisions to tired traders and travelers. These establishments would later become essential elements in Islamic trade, and along the Silk Road centuries later. Persian roads were more than merely pathways. They represented the empire's ambition to unify its diverse regions, not only by force, but by establishing connections. Through the standardization of coins, weights, and official languages, the Persians simplified interactions, commerce, and active participation in the imperial economy. In an age when movement was generally slow and unpredictable, Persia introduced something groundbreaking: order, organization, and a system specifically made for long-distance travel. In summary, the Persians did not just govern an empire, they carefully designed it. Unlike the Greeks, who were not known as empire builders, Persia engineered a well-structured and interconnected realm. In the early days, travel was not about exploration in the traditional way. Instead, what these ancient travelers shared was an insatiable curiosity. From Herodotus to Pythias, Greek adventurers journeyed across the ancient world in search of knowledge, commerce, and sometimes simply to marvel at the unknown. Their expeditions were not always aimed at conquest. Rather, they sought to pose questions, gather tales, and chart lands yet unrecorded. Among the most intriguing early explorers was Pythias of Massalia, known today as Marseille, who around 325 years before the Common Era sailed beyond the familiar territories through the Pillars of Hercules along the Atlantic shores, reportedly reaching a mysterious northern region he named Thu. Many historians suggest this might have been Iceland or Norway. Pythias recounted unusual occurrences, such as the sun shining at midnight and frozen oceans, which to Mediterranean audiences seemed like legends, but he was no storyteller. He combined the mind of a scientist with the soul of a seafarer. At the same time, Greek traders and thinkers ventured across the eastern Mediterranean, traveling through Egypt, Persia, and India. The conquests of Alexander the Great during the 4th century before the Common Era radically transformed the Greek world, ushering in the Hellenistic period when Greek became widely spoken from Athens to Bactria. Urban centers like Alexandria, Antioch, and Susia evolved into vibrant hubs for the exchange of goods and ideas. Travel, which once had been an uncommon pursuit, became a common expectation. Following the Greeks, the Romans, known for their engineering prowess, took travel to a new level by literally creating the infrastructure. Their extensive road network allowed movement and communication throughout the empire like never before. Cities were linked throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. At its height, the Roman Empire was proud of having more than 250,000 miles of roads, including over 50,000 miles paved with stone. Roads such as the Via, constructed in 312 BCE, were remarkable engineering achievements built to endure, with many still surviving today. Initially, Roman roads served military purposes, allowing legions to move swiftly to suppress uprisings. However, they also supported trade, postal delivery, pilgrimages, and even leisure travel. Wealthy Romans journeyed to visit Greek temples, Egyptian pyramids, and spa resorts in Gaul. Travel guides and stories about these adventures gained popularity among readers. For the Romans, traveling was not merely functional, it was a symbol. Roads demonstrated the empire's presence. If a road reached your town, it signified importance. Every mile paved with stone transformed how the ancient world perceived distance and connected places. While land paths such as the Silk Road transported caravans across deserts and mountain ranges, another extensive and ancient network spread over the waters of the Indian Ocean. These were the maritime silk routes connecting harbors from East Africa to India, reaching from the Arabian Peninsula to Southeast Asia. Long before the sailing era, sailors skillfully navigated the monsoon winds, traveling vast distances and turning the ocean into a global marketplace. The secret behind this system lay in the monsoon winds, consistent seasonal currents that shifted direction every half of the year. Ancient sailors mastered the art of timing their journeys according to these winds, enabling efficient and reliable sea travel across great expanses. Voyages followed the winds moving east when they came from Africa and west when they shifted direction. Understanding this allowed ships to confidently cross vast oceans, completing journeys once thought unattainable. Merchants from India sailed from regions such as Gujarat and the Tamil coast, exporting spices, fabrics, precious stones, and ivory. In exchange, they brought in horses, incense, gold, and even rare animals. Traders from Arab ports like Aden and Oman transported goods to and from the Persian Gulf, while East African merchants in cities like Mombasa exchanged ivory and tortoise shells. Chinese ships, especially during the Han and later Tang dynasties, also participated by exporting silk, ceramics, and lacquerware. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Greek and Roman vessels reached Indian harbors such as Barug and Muziris, completely avoiding overland routes. A Roman guidebook called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea provides a detailed account of busy trade centers, exchanged products, and maritime paths taken by sailors across the Indian Ocean. This document was not mere speculation. It served as a practical manual for navigating international trade. However, the ocean served purposes beyond commerce. It acted as a conduit for cultural exchange. Buddhism spread from India to Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia through these sea routes. Later, Islamic merchants brought their religion across the Indian Ocean, influencing coastal societies in East Africa and the Malay archipelago. Unlike often confrontational land empires, the Indian Ocean fostered connection and exchange. Maritime trade flourished through diversity and collaboration. Harbors became vibrant hubs where languages, religions, and cuisines merged. A Tamil trader, a Swahili sailor, a Yemeni religious leader, and a Chinese envoy could all conduct business within the same port. In these ancient waters, the currents carried more than just vessels. They transported entire civilizations. Yet not all ancient travel was motivated by commerce, conflict, or conquest. For countless individuals, faith was the strongest impetus to embark on a journey. Sacred places, holy rivers, and remote shrines attracted pilgrims across vast lands, often demanding great sacrifices in pursuit of healing, spiritual awakening, or divine blessing. These trips were far from leisurely escapes. They represented profound spiritual trials and expressions of dedication in motion. In ancient India, pilgrimage held immense significance for Hindus and Buddhists alike. Devotees traveled to immerse themselves in the sacred waters of the Ganges, to visit revered shrines such as Varanasi or Bodh Gaya, or to ascend the lofty Himalayas to find secluded mountain retreats. These long and often hazardous expeditions were believed to cleanse one's karma and bring one nearer to enlightenment. Buddhist monks ventured beyond India's borders, spreading their teachings along trade corridors reaching Sri Lanka, Central Asia, China, and further afield. In Greece, pilgrims journeyed toward oracles like Delphi, where Apollo's priestess uttered cryptic messages thought to disclose divine guidance. Others sought healing sanctuaries such as Epidaurus, performing offerings and rituals with hopes of curing illnesses. These sacred travels carried a double purpose, combining spiritual search with physical pilgrimage. Social and economic gatherings featured vendors, performers, and official ceremonies, making pilgrimages significant community occasions. In the Roman Empire, religious practice was deeply connected with the identity of the state. Traveling to temples and imperial cult centers served as demonstrations of both devotion and political allegiance. Followers might visit the Temple of Asclepius seeking healing or undertake the journey to Jerusalem, then under Roman rule, as part of Jewish religious customs, especially during celebrations like Passover. Pilgrimage also played a vital role in Zoroastrian and Egyptian customs. Ancient Persians traveled to fire temples, while Egyptians embarked on sacred voyages along the Nile to join temple festivities such as those at Abydos, thought to be the resting place of Osiris. These holy journeys often intertwined spiritual and political realms. Roads were maintained not solely for military forces or traders, but for the devoted. Shrines appeared along commercial paths, and temples served as lodging for travelers on pilgrimages. Consequently, pilgrimage helped connect extensive territories through shared faiths and sacred landscapes. Above all, these travels transcended physical movement. To journey for religious reasons meant symbolically shedding one's ego, comforts, and worldly ties to return renewed. The body crossed the land, but the spirit ventured much farther. By the time the ancient era transitioned into the medieval age, the groundwork for worldwide interconnection had already been established. These routes were created not only by emperors, but by numerous travelers who dared to face the unknown. Merchants, pilgrims, explorers, and scholars combined their efforts to build an extensive network of paths, both overland and across seas, serving sacred, commercial, peaceful, and dangerous purposes. Their legacy extends beyond mere footprints. It represents a rich exchange of goods, ideas, beliefs, and technologies that influenced civilizations for many generations. Travel transformed everything. The adoption of writing systems, such as the Phoenician alphabet, contributed to consistent communication across different regions. Religious traditions like Buddhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and later Islam spread globally thanks to the tireless efforts of wandering teachers and faithful followers. Aromatic spices from India enhanced Roman banquets. Chinese silk beautified the robes of Parthian rulers, and African gold traveled across the Red Sea to find its way into Persian vaults. Travel also altered humanity's perception of the world. Early geographers like Eratosthenes estimated the Earth's circumference with impressive precision using only measurements of the sun's rays and logical deduction. Figures such as Strabo and Ptolemy charted continents relying on indirect information and bold hypotheses. Even inaccurate maps represented progress toward a broader understanding, a vision of a connected planet where distant populations were no longer myths, but fellow humans on different paths. These roads, rivers, and sea routes eventually developed into important trade networks during the medieval and early modern periods. The Silk Road would blend into the Islamic trade routes, while the Roman roads were traveled by Christian pilgrims. Knowledge of Indian Ocean navigation would pass down to Arab, Chinese, and ultimately European sailors. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect is that the ancient spirit of exploration, this desire to venture beyond what is familiar, still lives on. Although today's world is driven by engines and GPS, its core pulses with the same curiosity that propelled Phoenician mariners, Chinese caravan traders, and Egyptian envoys many thousands of years ago. These travelers did not carry passports, credit cards, or travel insurance, yet they possessed courage, vision, and an unwavering conviction that what lay beyond the mountains, deserts, or seas was important. They believed that the world beyond the horizon was worth any danger. Because of their faith, we have inherited a globe connected not merely by commerce or conquest, but through the very movement of people themselves.